Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Finovate podcast. We are continuing our exploration of the FinovateSpring Best of Show winners from 2024, a really great group. And as a reminder, you can find all of the videos from FinovateSpring up at finovate.com/videos. Joining me today, we have Kalyani Ramadurgam, co-founder and CEO of Kobalt Labs. Kalyani, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Greg. Excited to talk.
So it was a great demo up there on stage. And again, I would encourage anybody listening to check it out before or after you listen to this episode. But can you start by giving us just a quick overview of yourself and some background on Kobalt Labs?
Absolutely. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kalyani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kobalt Labs, and we are an AI co-pilot to automate and strengthen third-party diligence for fintechs and financial institutions. So my background is that I'm an AI researcher from Stanford, where I did my undergrad and grad school and was a researcher there for a while. I spent some time at Apple Pay as an engineer, where I was building out some transaction monitoring and sanction screening, anti-fraud tooling. And then for the last couple of years, I was an engineer and AI lead at a health tech company, actually, that was very regulated, not in finance, but kind of similar problems in a different font. And then 1 year ago, we started Kobalt Labs through the Y Combinator Accelerator, and here we are today.
Yeah, really interesting. Obviously, a lot of strong experience there in your background. So for people who haven't seen the demo video yet, can you give us just a quick run through of how exactly Kobalt works? It doesn't need to obviously be the entire demo, but kind of a high level overview I think would be really helpful.
Absolutely. So like I said before, we automate all things third-party diligence. So when I say third-party diligence, that usually includes everything from vendor risk assessment all the way to monitoring, as well as partner and merchant risk assessment, whether you're a partner bank or whether you're a fintech that's looking to do business with new entities. So what our tool actually does is we are, first of all, synchronized with every single financial regulation that exists in the world. So that enables us to essentially check any set of documentation against any regulation and provide really high quality explanations and gap analysis. So you can imagine if you're a bank doing diligence on a vendor or fintech, we can ingest everything from the contract, their AML policies, terms of service, the big questionnaire, all the documents they'd give you. And we can essentially scan everything within minutes and compare it against any set of regulations you want, whether it's, UDAP, BSA, AML, ACH, lending, money movement, everything, and basically provide an AI-powered risk assessment where we identify all of the gaps, all of the risks, and essentially cite all the regulations, recent enforcement actions, and give you a really nice holistic review that your compliance and risk team can then take it and run. And then we also have some tooling internally that lets you check your own internal policies against regulatory guidance, things like that, and shows you how to improve them.
Yeah, clearly a lot under the hood. It's a very powerful tool. Before we go too much farther, I want to just clarify something because the phrase third parties, I think is something we just want to define really quickly. How big is that universe of third parties? What exactly do you mean by that? And can you give some examples?
Sure, yeah. So I think there's a couple of big examples that pop out from our customer base. The first one that's been obviously very hot lately is anyone that's a banking as a service provider, whether you're an intermediary or the actual partner bank itself. A lot of those folks are using us to automate all of their fintech partner diligence. So they're not hit, with all the recent consent orders. And then for the banks as well, we do a lot of vendor diligence as part of their TPRM process. And then on the fintech side, they're using us to do their own vendor diligence as well as all things partner onboarding. So the merchants or partners that they're generally all integrating with in the ecosystem.
So how did you decide that third-party review specifically was an area that's worth focusing on? Is it a case of nobody else really paying attention to it, or is it just kind of the biggest pain point that you could see?
It's kind of one of the biggest pain points that banks and fintechs are all thinking about right now with a lot of the regulatory pressure. So zooming out, obviously there's a lot going on in the world of banking as a service with third-party relationships. So there's huge urgency to fix all of those problems. And that's a big pull that we're seeing from the market. But at the same time, there's just generally more scrutiny on security and compliance of folks that you're doing business with now more than ever. So if you look at some of the guidance coming out of the OCC, the Fed, the FDIC, the CFPB, they're all saying that banks and financial institutions have to show that they're investing in in-house efforts to protect themselves against the third parties they're doing business with. This used to be something that they were just outsourcing to consulting firms or external counsel, but now there's a general consensus that that's not enough anymore, and folks need to invest in in-house efforts and show that they're really doing it right. So for that reason, it's something that everyone is interested in investing in, and it's kind of a bigger headache than ever. So pretty ripe for disruption.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And at the risk of being unpopular, I will say that I find myself in many cases agreeing with the regulators on this one. I think that is something that we need to see a lot of oversight on. It's very necessary for the space, especially as you have so many kind of new ways of using technology. Things are happening very quickly on the technology side of it. And there's always this risk that you could end up running aground somewhere. And certainly, we've seen firsthand over the past call a couple of decades what can happen when people go too far away or go too far down a road. So I know that's not always a popular opinion in the fintech community, but I do try and support the regulators when I can because I know they've got a hard job, and certainly technology like yours helps make it a lot easier. One question that I have for you on that, obviously there is kind of a fintech side of this too. It's not just financial institutions who have skin in the game, but people who are themselves those kind of third party or service provider types have some skin here as well, because if they can't prove that they're compliant, then no bank can actually work with them. Have you had a lot of traction from that side of the ecosystem as well?
Yeah, totally. Because one of our biggest value adds is for either side, whether you're the bank or the fintech and their vendor, we want to shorten the time it takes to form a revenue generating partnership. So we have a number of fintechs that are using us not only to handle their TPRM process, but they're running their own documents through, they're telling their partner bank to use us because it reduces the headache of sending documents back and forth, of that redlining that really should be our job to find that needle in a haystack. So fintechs are finding that we can help them work with partner banks faster, and partner banks are finding that we can help them, get to that yes or no decision or that middle ground much faster than before.
Yeah. So speaking of needles in a haystack, I think this is where I should ask you the question about how exactly artificial intelligence enters into it. Because, there's been a lot of noise about AI, certain things people hear and they think, well, that's not really AI specifically from a technical standpoint. But how are you using AI, and what is it letting you do that would have been impossible to do without it?
Totally. I think there's so much AI vaporwave technology out there. And so I'll highlight a specific thing we can do that really just underscores the fact that human beings cannot do something that we're able to do, and we can give them superpowers. What we're able to do is, and I did this in the Finovate demo, so encourage any listeners to go check it out. But I uploaded an 80-page AML policies and procedures document, as well as a 20-page contract. And within 1 minute, I was able to scan everything and pinpoint, I think, 10 or 11 really crucial gaps and issues that we found in that document. So, usually this process, you need to involve the BSA AML team, you need to involve the lawyer, you need to involve a compliance or risk analyst, and those people should still be involved, but it takes their time from hours and hours and hours to literally just a couple minutes. And that's something that is really exemplifies, I think, the power of some of the recent AI innovation that we're excited to harness.
Yeah. And again, here's where that kind of co-pilot phrase comes back in as well. You're not necessarily trying to replace those groups or say, use us instead of, but it's very much meant to be an add-on. This will help all of those people be more effective in their jobs. So I think that's a crucial piece to stress as well.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears now and talk about the regulatory environment more explicitly, because obviously this is a hot topic at FinovateSpring. This is something that's on the minds of a lot of banks and all the people who support those banks. But what are you seeing from your perspective about how regulators are changing or shaping the industry?
Yeah. So I think right off the bat, it's really clear to everyone involved, whether you're the bank, the fintech, a vendor, or a regulator, that this process is such a headache. It's so manual, it's so slow, and it's pretty deeply broken. So the regulators, first of all, are excited to just see a tool that can help them do their job easier. But I'll go into a bit more detail about something that they're excited from an AI perspective. So when I was at Finovate, I actually got a chance to go to the OCC offices in San Francisco, demo to them in person, and get their feedback about what's useful and what isn't. And I think, like you mentioned, they were really excited by this concept of a co-pilot and this idea that, technology doesn't just absolve a bank of any responsibility, but it can enable them to do their jobs better and to show examiners that they're doing their jobs better, which just makes everyone's life easier. So I think the regulators want to see responsible uses of AI and technology that enable institutions to be better instead of just, automating really important decisions and kind of washing your hands of responsibility.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I'm glad you had the opportunity to go and chat with him. And so, for people who didn't come to Finovate Spring, it was Donna Murphy, who's the Deputy Comptroller for Compliance Risk Policy, who was actually speaking at Finovate Spring. And I give her a huge amount of credit because it's not easy, I should say, to get up in front of a room full of people, that you are basically policing and talk to them about what your goals are going to be for the next couple of years. But I think that kind of dialogue is absolutely crucial because in many cases, regulators want the same things that the financial industry wants. You want to be productive, you want to be safe, you want everybody to be, protected from kind of these horrific potential outcomes, which do exist and are absolutely possible. So I give Donna a huge amount of credit. And I also give you credit for being able to go and chat with them. How have you found, your kind of relationship with those regulators evolving as you've continued down this path? I mean, it's relatively new for y'all. You've only been doing this for about a year. So the fact that some of these regulators are even making themselves accessible to you, I think is noteworthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a reg tech company or doing anything in the compliance or risk space, it would be remiss to not make sure you're aligning yourselves with the regulators. And that's not to say, okay, we want to amp up, the number of enforcement actions you're able to take, but we want to say, hey, if we are building a solution that helps banks and FIs and fintechs be compliant, then they're only compliant if the regulators are happy with what they're doing. And so we need to take regulators' opinions into account as we're building tech like this. So we definitely like to stay close to folks like Donna and make sure that we'll never get their explicit endorsement. But what I want to do is keep showing our tech to them and keep getting their feedback about what are features that they want to see banks do. What do they wish that banks would show them that examiners have a tough time with right now?
Are you finding that Donna is able to give you some ideas of where you need to go next or what potentially would be good areas for you to look at? Again, without that kind of explicit endorsement, which obviously you can't get. They're not in a position to be able to give that to you. But are you able to get a couple of ideas for, hey, this would be a cool thing to build or some new functionality that you want to think about adding?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we even beefed up some of our functionality based on what they themselves told us during Finovate. So one part of our tool raises gaps that we find against a third party, right? And naturally, that means that we will sometimes raise gaps that an institution is okay with taking on and does not need to be remediated. So the OCC actually said that that's not something that we should try to mask because examiners actually want to see that and it makes the audit process even faster. So they said instead of hiding risks that a bank is willing to take on, the most productive thing to do is to actually have a place where the bank or fintech can say, hey, we see this risk. This is why we are okay with it. And this is that reasoning. Because they're going to ask those questions in the first place, anyways. And so they actually changed my mind. I was thinking of deprecating and hiding some of those unnecessary risks, but they actually said, keep them and help the bank explain why they're there. And that'll actually make everyone's lives even easier. And we found that a lot of the banks we work with have responded really positively to that. And it actually has made audit periods faster.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I remember, in the early days of Finovate, the idea that a regulator would come and talk to us was just kind of, out of the question, right? It was something that you could sort of vaguely imagine it might happen, but the idea that someone would actually show up and say, hey, we're willing to work with you. We want to communicate with you. We want this to be a two-way street so that, people don't just get surprised. We don't want to necessarily regulate through, oh, you stepped over this line. Here's a big smack coming your way. We want it to be something which is much more collaborative and much more, hey, here's how you can build in a way that's safe. Here's what our priorities are as regulators. Here's how we want to try and protect you and protect the industry. So from our standpoint, it's been really great for us, for all of the innovators who come to Finovate. The more we've been able to get those voices represented, and we'll continue to do that. It's something which I think adds a lot of value to the events. So I see we're just about at the end of our time. I have one last question for you. As we mentioned, you're really only a year old, which is incredibly young for somebody who's done as much as you have and who's won Best of Show at Finovate. But I'm sure there's quite a bit that's on your mind right now. What's kind of the top of your to-do list as you look to build on what you've already accomplished and continue to grow?
Yeah, so I'll answer it in two parts. The first part is on that regulatory compliance side. There's so much to keep iterating on with our existing partners, and we'll be putting out some nice case studies and metrics in the coming months about that. But there's a lot to do with respect to audit readiness and really streamlining some of the communications with vendors and partners. But I would say an additional new direction we'll be taking on soon is, if you think about risk, there's obviously compliance and regulation, but the big elephant in the room is that the other half of risk is InfoSec. And so we'll be building out an additional totally new InfoSec module where, you can upload your vendors or partners SOC 2 report, for example. We can extract all the relevant information and controls you need, summarize it, so no one has to read through that, 50-page document. So there's a lot of automation and a lot of acceleration to do on the InfoSec review side as well.
Yeah, certainly enough to keep you busy for the next 12 months at any rate.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I appreciate the time you've been able to share with us today. Again, the company is called Kobalt Labs. I've been talking to Kalyani Ramadurgam, their CEO and co-founder. Kalyani, thank you so much for taking the time, and congratulations again on your Best of Show win.
Thank you so much, Greg, and super grateful to Finovate for all the support.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.